If you haven't watched my first pin to pattern video, I recommend watching that because the beginning of that really dives deep. But if you're watching this video for a specific reason, I'll give you a brief overview of everything that I consider before I go into a crochet dupe. So the three main things that I consider are transparency, flexibility, and shape. With transparency, I basically look at a garment and I think, is it okay if this ends up slightly transparent? With crochet, most of the time it does end up a little bit more see-through than your average garment. Obviously, you can make crochet garments a lot more opaque. It does tend to make the process a lot longer. So if I'm trying to do something in a short period of time, this is the first thing I ask myself. Secondly, I always look at the flexibility of the garment. Crochet garments are always going to end up a lot more tight than your average garment. This is because of the way that they are stitched. They're not so easy to shape to your body if you don't have any sort of adjustability in the garment. If the item that I'm recreating doesn't have a zip or a button closure or a corset kind of tie up, I consider adding those things into the dupe because it will overall just make it a lot easier for me to get on and off my body and also overall help me manipulate the shape of the garment. The last thing that I consider is the actual shape itself of the garment. So I always question if it's a loose garment or a more fitted garment. This just will help me figure out what kind of stitch I need to use, what yarn I need to use, what hook I need to use. So if it's a looser kind of garment that is kind of baggier, like a sweater, I can obviously consider using a thicker wool. I can consider using a bigger hook, a bigger stitch. If it's a more fitted garment, I'll probably lean more towards a thin cotton, smaller hook, maybe half double crochet, even single crochet. Considering the shape just helps me actually figure out what kind of gauge I need to look at and what kind of materials I need to use. If you have never made a crochet dupe before, those are three things that you should absolutely consider before going into it. You also have to be realistic about what that dupe is going to look like and how closely it's actually going to look to the real thing. So welcome to Pin to Pattern. I'm actually really shocked at how well received this idea was. This is going to be a monthly series, so if there's something that you would like to see me break down and even potentially recreate in the future, please comment down below. The top comments are the ones that I will likely recreate or break down, so make sure if you're not commenting anything that you're engaging in the comment section so that I know what you guys want to see. Before we get started, I feel the need to disclaim that I am not claiming to be 100% correct here. This is just my creative hobby. I'm not a professional. If there is something that I say, an idea that I have of how I would go about recreating something and you think there's a better way of doing it, please feel free to comment down below, but just don't be an asshole about it. It's not that hard to be nice. If you recreate any of these things based off of what I tell you, or if you need help with a garment and you think that I could help in any way, please feel free to DM me on Instagram. I do not bite. I actually have the best time talking to you guys. Actually have the most creative brains and you think of the coolest things. I love it. I feel like it boosts my creative energy. So please don't think that you're burdening me with ideas or questions because I absolutely love it and I feel like I learn off of you as well. Anyway, I'm gonna stop yapping now and we're gonna jump into the garments that I have for you today. The first garment that I want to talk about recreating is this Mode Mischief button-down blouse. These button-down blouses have been taking the world by storm at the moment. I absolutely love them. I feel like they look good on everyone and I love when there is a trend that looks good on everyone because everyone can look really hot and sexy. I feel like this trend all started with this blouse from Mode Mischief. This was like the thing where people were like, I need to get my hands on that. I think that with this top in particular, it's likely done in maybe 6 panels, not including the sleeves, because obviously there is a lot of shaping going on here. You've got the shaping around the bust where it's like a little bit bigger for your boobs, and then you've got a tighter waist. That's why I say that I think it's probably done in 6 panels. 2 at the front, 2 down the bottom, and then 2 at the back. In order to crochet this, I would just follow that same system. I would use a cotton yarn, maybe like a 4-ply cotton yarn and a smaller hook. Just helps to be a lot more specific. As much as I hate gauge swatches, I would start with a gauge swatch. I would measure my waist and I would measure my bust, and then I would take that gauge swatch and I would calculate it in a gauge calculator against my bust measurements and my waist measurements. Then from there, I would take my waist measurements and split it into 4. Your back panel will take up half of that calculation. So say you've got your waist measurements split into quarters. Half of those quarters is going to be your back panel, and then the other half are going to be split into 2 down the front. It's so hard to fight the urge to say I hope that makes sense because I say it so much, and if it doesn't make sense, I'm sure you will tell me, so I don't need to keep saying it. But with all of the splitting of the measurements, I would do the exact same thing for my bust. So take my bust measurement, split it into 4. Half of that 4 will be together on my back panel, and then the other half will be split into and will be my 2 front cups, basically. I would start with my waist panels because they're easier to do. I would just do 3 big rectangles for as big big as you need according to your waist measurement for as long as you need. So for this top, it would be from under your bust down to just below your belly button. From this point, I would move on to the bust panel. The front bust panels would be basically the same as the lower waist panels, but you would obviously add shaping here. So with the bust panels, if you have a larger bust size, your bust panels are ultimately going to end up wider than your waist panels. I've thought of this and I've thought of how I would navigate this. I think what I would do is I would kind of create like a makeshift dart when I am stitching everything together. What I mean by this is I would start with the back panels first, because this is probably the easiest way to test out if this theory works. But I would lay my two back panels down flat and I would just line them up so I can see how many excess stitches I have on either side with my bust panel. And then what I would do is I would take the number of stitches that I have on either side, and then I would just basically allocate them to the center of the bust panel. So I would mark from the center stitch out those excess stitches in the center. Then I would still stitch as normal. So I would start with the first stitch of the top back panel and the first stitch of the lower back panel and start stitching it together there up until that stitch marker. And then I would basically calculate how many excess stitches I have on either side. If I need to stitch, say, 2 stitches to 1 stitch in the center of the bottom panel. I don't know if this is making any sense. I'm hoping that this would create kind of a dart effect where it would cinch everything in the middle. I have to rely on future me and pray that she draws up what I'm talking about in a way that makes a lot more sense visually. But that's what I'm thinking I would do. And then I would do the exact same thing for the bust. I would make a little makeshift dart in the center of the bust panel so it would flow out and it would give you space for your chest. So once I've done all of the stitching of the front panels and the back panels, I would stitch the back panels to the front panels by the shoulders and by the sides, and then you should just have the opening for the sleeve. The sleeves for this top have obviously got the typical bell shape shaping to them if you stitched it all together. A way that you could just avoid doing this, instead of on the cups doing the shaping here, just make them straight and then just stitch the sleeves directly on. A lot of boleros do this. It kind of gives you more of a drop shoulder than a form-fitting shoulder. And then from here you can basically add your buttons, you can crochet collar. There's a lot of tutorials on YouTube. I will try and find one and put it down below for you. But that's how I would make that top. A little bit complicated, but I think it would look amazing if somebody could achieve this. And I'm gonna try, so keep an eye out for that. Next up, I'm gonna be focusing on this wrap midi skirt. This is also by Mode Mischief. It's actually a matching set with the top that I just spoke about. I feel like midi skirts are kind of really taking over as well at the moment. I love a good flowy midi skirt. I think they're so effortlessly cool. Right now in Australia, we've just gone into autumn and I feel like they're going to be really big, especially in Melbourne in autumn. But I also feel like the other half of the world that's currently gone into spring, I feel like midi skirts are still going to be really big. So this is kind of like a worldwide trend that could happen right now. This is just a wrap skirt, which I've recently come to find is so easy to make. First of all, I would probably do this in a medium weight yarn just to add some weight to the skirt so it pulls down and kind of drapes the way that I would want it to. And I'd also probably use a bigger hook just to speed up the process because I am a bit impatient. Really depends on the look that you're going for. If you want it to be as opaque as this skirt, then obviously you're gonna have to use a smaller hook. Again, do a little gauge swatch if you want to know exactly what it's gonna look like, but otherwise I feel like with a wrap skirt you can basically just make it as you go without a gauge swatch, but that's just my opinion and it could be a harmful one. So just trust your intuition on that step. This is just done in 2 sections. So you're gonna make the top half first, so that top panel that kind of sits just below her hips. So you want to make this to actually fit your hips. You don't want it to be too loose or anything like that. You want it to actually be form-fitting. So I would just make a really long rectangular panel. With a wrap skirt, you basically are going to have a button on the inside on one side and then you're going to have a tie up on the other side. In my last video, I actually do kind of show you the process of how I go about making a wrap skirt. I do use a centering machine to make my panels, but overall you can see the shape of the skirt and how I assemble it and where the ties go and where the buttons go and all that kind of stuff. So if you wanted to create the first half of this skirt using that video, feel free to do that. But after I've made this section, there are 2 different ways that you could go about making the lower section of the skirt. Obviously you can see with the skirt there's a very distinct line between the top half and the bottom half. So 2 ways that you could do this. One way is by stitching the lower panel completely separately to that skirt and then stitching it all together at the end, kind of with the same method that I mentioned before with the top, where you're stitching 2 stitches to the bottom panel to 1 stitch for the top panel, because obviously there's some pleating going on here. Your panel will need to be excessively big, probably double the size of what the top panel is, so it's a lot of work. It will take you a long time, but that's one way that you could do it. And when you're doing your seam, I would do a single crochet seam and then have the single crochet seam on the outside, so you can see that very distinct line. You can see where all the ruffles are. I think that would look really cool, but I think it would take a lot of time as well. The other way that you could do this is by working directly off off of the bottom of that wrap mini skirt that you make first. And for the first row of going back and forth, I would do an increase in every single stitch, but I would do it in the back loop only, because this leaves you with like half of the stitch still sitting out the front and kind of lifts that stitch up. So it does kind of still give you a little distinct line that will separate the top of your skirt from the bottom of your skirt. And then the next row, I would do an increase in every second stitch, but from this point forward, I would just be doing my stitches as normal. So I'd be going through both loops as normal, and then from that point forward, I would just do a normal stitch and every single stitch back and forth for as many rows as I need until the skirt is my desired length. And honestly, that's how you would do it. That's why I love wrap skirts, because they are literally just one big panel and then you just tie it up. I've had so many comments and DMs about this brand, particularly this midi skirt and the capris. I just want to disclaim before I even deep dive into this for you, I do not condone recreating this to sell. This has been made by a independent designer, and I know that a lot of time and effort and work would have gone into these garments. But that being said, I'm totally aware that not everyone has the money to spend on handmade garments, and if you have the skills to recreate it for yourself, I don't see any harm in it, but please do not remake this to sell. So this is how I would recreate this for myself. It looks like these garments are made with a light to medium weight yarn. For some of these skirt in particular, it looks like it's made of a cotton yarn, but for the maxi skirt in particular, the lower half is definitely mohair. I would say that it's actually been created with a larger hook. The reason why I say this is because if you are just looking at it briefly, it looks like it's a mesh stitch, but if you actually zoom in on the garments and take a closer look, you can see that no stitches have been skipped. There are no chains in between the stitches. It's actually every single stitch has been worked into, but the holes for the stitches are quite large and the stitches themselves are quite large, and that tells me that a bigger hook has been used. So I would use a thinner yarn but a bigger hook in order to create this kind of look. In saying that though, I would start the waistband with a smaller hook that is more appropriate for the cotton that I'm using or the wool that I'm using. You want to create the right size for your hips. So I would create the waistband first using a smaller hook, and then once I've created the waistband, which I think would be just like a couple of rows of single crochet or even half double crochet, then I would move on to using a bigger hook for the rest of the garment. Honestly, this garment, you're just using a bigger hook and you're just working, I think it's double crochet, but it could be treble crochet for as many rows as you need until it's at the length that you want. So for the midi skirt, you would probably just go to just below your knees. For the capris, you would obviously do enough rows until you kind of reach that crotch area, and then you would stitch it together in the center and then work in the round for each leg, and just keep doing that until it's at the length that you want. You could even do the little micro shots that they have on their website. It kind of all has the same blueprint of how it's created, but it's just different shapes. With the midi skirt and the capris, you're just going to finish off with a little scalloped rim around the edge. But with the maxi skirt, it looks like they've switched to a different kind of yarn and an even bigger hook again, and they've done one row of double crochet in this different yarn with this different hook, and then they've done like a small scalloped edge with the same hook, and then they've actually disconnected their yarn at this point, and then they've reattached a mohair yarn still with a big hook to the base of that last row before they added those last two rows of the different yarn. So basically where that different yarn was attached to, that's where they've started attaching the mohair to, instead of to the base of this row here that's been scalloped. For that first row using the mohair, they've either increased in every single stitch or they've increased in every second stitch, just to have this more like flowy effect for that part of the skirt rather than it being form-fitting. And then they've just done it for as many rows until it reaches about their ankle, and then they've just switched back to that same yarn that they used before to create a scalloped edge at the very bottom. For the waistband, it looks like they've just done really long chains, I guess. To me, it doesn't look like crochet, it looks like it's been knitted, but you could definitely still do it with crochet. You could just do one really long chain, maybe do like 2 rows of single crochet or something like that, and then obviously weave that through your waistband. And then there's obviously a little orchid at the front. There are so many tutorials on YouTube that would show you how to make a crochet orchid. I'll see if I can find a fun tutorial and put it down below for you. I think the cinching at the back is the thing that draws a lot of people in. when you're looking at the photos of it, you can't really see what's been wrapped around. So to me, it tells me that it's either something that's really thin and hard to see, or it's something that's kind of like the same color as the rest of the skirt. This is a amazing designer, and they have probably done it in a different way, but that's how I would do it, in a way that makes sense to me. With this series, as always, I love to finish with a little quick fire round where I just find a bunch of crochet garments and I explain how, in simple terms, I would recreate it. So the first thing is this Frankie's Bikinis poncho. This is with their Bella Hadid collaboration that just came out recently. Bella Hadid was in my last video 2 times and now she's here again. Maybe she just really loves crochet, or maybe I just really love her. I don't really know. This poncho looks like it would be so easy to recreate. A poncho is just 2 big panels stitched together. This is just a big panel that's kind of shaped like this and then like this, kind of shaped like a diamond, and then it's just stitched together along the top of the sleeves. This to me looks like it is done with, it kind of looks like filet crochet, but I actually think it's not. I think it is like a woven mesh stitch, which I've actually never played around with, but to me that's what this looks like. But then the word, when I zoomed in on this photo, it looks like it's actually been knitted and then attached afterwards. You could still do this with crochet. You could honestly do this as filet crochet. There are a million ways you could recreate this and make it your own. I would probably do it as filet crochet because I love filet crochet, but there are a million ways that you can do this, and this would be so easy to do, and you could get this done in like a week, maybe even less than that if you had the time. Secondly, I have this headscarf. I feel like headscarves are gonna really take over this winter for Melbourne especially, and I'm actually in the process of making a pattern for one, so if you want to see that, please keep an eye out for that as well. But I feel like headscarves can be done in multiple ways, but for a more full coverage one, I would actually kind of create it the way you would start creating a balaclava. So I have a balaclava tutorial on my channel, and basically in that I create 2 panels and then I stitch them together, and then I do all of the neck ribbing and the face ribbing and all of that kind of stuff. But for a headscarf, I would just do 2 panels and stitch them together, and then just add 2 long straps to the base of it. That's how I would make a headscarf. So simple. You could make so many in a day. You could make so many and sell them at a market, just by the way. Headscarves, balaclavas, beanies. The very last thing is this viral crochet Miu Miu bag. I have seen this so many times and it's been on my Pinterest feed for years. Like, I feel like it's been around for a long time, but people just still love it and people still want to recreate it. And honestly, it is so simple. It is a scrap yarn project. Like, you could just take any yarn that you have lying around. To me, it looks like one big rectangle just smooshed together and just stitched together at the top with a zip. It does not look like there's any real shaping to it at all. So I would just do one really big rectangular panel with scrap yarn, keep making the panel and keep folding it in half until I can see that it is the depth that I want the bag to be. And then I would just fold it in half, stitch it together down the sides, stitch a zip to it, fold it inside out, and then they just attached leather straps to it. But you could do any kind of straps attached to it. You don't have to use leather straps. You could use any, really. You could crochet your own straps. You could buy some from the shops. You could repurpose something that you found in an op shop. So many fun things that you could do with a bag like this. And then the Miu Miu logo that's on the front, the letters are made separately. So you can crochet letters and then stitch them onto the bag. I've never done it before, but it's like freehanding almost, and then just stitching it onto the bag. I'll try and find a tutorial for doing things like that and link it down below as well. There's a lot of things I have to link down below, but I like to be helpful. So, but that's how I would recreate that bag. And that is everything. I will see you next week for a new video. Bye.